religiosity and did not take other variables into account. Plus, it doesn't really tell us what is the cause. Is it because some psychologists I found have speculated, does first world countries with increased technology, does that actually increase secularism, or is secularism causing the benefits of society? So it doesn't actually look at that. And for example, there have been other studies. Like, for example, there was a study done in Czech Republic, Germany, Holland, Greece, Hungary, Israel, Italy, Mexico, Poland, Portugal, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, the U.S. And it was called Values and Religiosity, a meta-analysis of studies using Schwartz model. Found across these 21 countries, a lot of the countries where the secularism is happening, that religion was positively correlated with being respectful, helpful, responsible, self-disciplined, honoring parents and elders. The correlation was 0.45. So when we do single out religiosity, even in these countries, we do see positive correlation between intrinsic religiosity. So just saying, well, we can take religion out and we still get the hospitals, we still get the positive benefits. That's actually been looked at in a lot of these studies, and it always shows that extrinsic religiosity is actually causing negative correlates to a lot of this ethical behavior and overall well-being, whereas intrinsic religiosity is what is increasing the ethical behavior.
So let me see if I can phrase. I have no idea how you can properly distinguish between extrinsic and intrinsic. I do understand, I come from, a Southern Baptist background, and we were well aware that there were people in the church, hey, they're Sunday and Easter Christians, or they're going through the motions. And, the Bible talks about that there are people who call me Lord, Lord, and I never knew them, et cetera. So this seems to be kind of like the intrinsic religiosity is suggesting that we can get to what people truly believe and what their motivations are. The problem is it intrinsic Christianity that has a benefit, or is it intrinsic Christianity, intrinsic Islam, and or what versions of Christianity? Have those studies gone through and said, yep, this one? Or is it just a broad, if you believe this is the case sincerely, and you're not just there for the social stuff, you are less likely to do these sorts of crimes? Because I'm not denying that if you convince someone that if you steal, God is going to mess you up, that can be a motivation for people to not steal. My issue still, of course, is whether or not it's true. But I also think that you could still convince people not to take those actions without appealing to the religious thing. So I'm not sure how you distinguish intrinsic and extrinsic, because in many cases what we've seen is somebody is generally considered what would be a sincere, intrinsic, true Christian right up until the point where they, their sexual proclivities are paraded before the church and they're ostracized. And now all of a sudden, okay, well, they didn't actually believe it. It seems kind of self-affirming.
Well, first of all, I forgot to mention previously, Matt, if you don't drink beer, we can't be friends.
I will have one on occasion. I think I like Paulaner Oktoberfest, but I'm doing iced tea right now.
I drink whiskey with every debate.
There we go.
All right, well, first
that
of all,
I can do.
Well, if you come to Tucson, I'll take you to a great whiskey place. So first thing I want to note is how do we distinct between intrinsic and extrinsic? First of all, science doesn't deal in proof. We deal in what is most probable. A lot of these studies, they draw people in. They ask them very subtle questions. They get an idea. Sometimes they'll ask friends. Sometimes they'll look at medical records, statistics, and whatnot like that. My wife and I, when we lived in Pittsburgh, we participated in one of these studies, and we had no idea what the study was about until the end, because they were very good at hiding these subtle cue markers, using people coming in who were not actually doing the study. They were, like blind type studies. And so there's actually a lot of interesting ways they go about doing these. But a lot of them do reach the results that it is the cause of intrinsic religion. For example, there was a study, Religion and Completed Suicide, a meta-analysis, which found that, they actually said that the meta-analysis suggests an overall protective effect of religiosity from completed suicide, with about an average effect size about 0.38. So some of them are, there's a lot of work that goes into trying to conduct these studies. It's not like guys sitting around going, let's go out and ask a bunch of people, who here is religious? Great. Who here
understand that?
No one's doing that.
I know. I hate that. I understand that. I'm saying, I know that you can ask subtle questions to get to what people actually believe. But there's another layer to this. If person X, because they've been taught by their religious organization, thinks that suicide is immoral, they sincerely believe that. I'm not saying it's difficult to sort out whether or not they sincerely believe that. It is that belief in their head, which will probably decrease the chances that they're going to kill themselves. Is it directly because of a particular religious doctrine, or are they convinced of that alongside a religious doctrine that, you could get rid of the fact that the church says suicide is immoral, and they would still maintain that belief for reasons other than it was in the Bible or a pastor taught me?
Well, based on the evidence, and again, it's not proof, it's based on probability, but based on the evidence, it is intrinsic religion which is causing these positive effects, which is overwhelmingly associated. I mean, the meta-analysis I cited on crime looked at 60 different studies with all different types of sample sizes, all different types of experiments to conduct. The overwhelming amount of evidence shows that it is what is the positive correlations. It is these actual beliefs. We can speculate that it might not be, but the overwhelming evidence is leading us to that general conclusion.
I still don't see how we can create a causal connection here. I certainly see how we can see a correlation here, because if I believe that it's good to go out and help the homeless, it doesn't matter whether I came by that belief through religious indoctrination or a holy book or through some other thing. The fact that I believe it makes me more likely to go out and do this. That is about what the individual believes. I don't know how we tie that to religion as a cause any more than saying, I first learned about this, in kindergarten. Therefore, if you go to kindergarten and you have to play with other kids, that, reduces this. It's about the idea and the belief. And certainly, religions have had kind of like a privileged position in society. It's tax-exempt status. It's the de facto, hey, you move to a new town, you can come to our church. And there are secular communities and secular humanism, other ethical views that haven't had nearly the time or the benefits to try to establish those same things. So I'm fine with the idea that a religious teaching can instill an idea in someone's head that can make them a better person. So on that front, I've already acknowledged that, religions can do good. My issue is more like, is religion a requirement to get to that point? Or can we encourage people to be good and perhaps even be better if we, don't begin with a religious ideology? Which may not be the subject of the debate, but I just wanted you to know what my objection was.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, that's not really the subject of the debate. I mean, for the subject of the debate, I would say that if you agree, then you agree. It's like, that was basically what came prepared to say. But if for your argument that we would need to see if we could get, I would want to see some studies done on this. There's not actually been that much, and I was trying to look pretty hard to find some sort of study that I could look that would say, can we get these benefits without religion? As far as I can find, the studies I have read, like the one on religion, delinquency, drug use, crime, self-control, a lot of them argue that the religion is what is directly the cause. Obviously it's not proof, as I've said numerous times, but it does show that if you do remove the religion, these other things, these bad behaviors will go up based on their analysis.
I don't buy that at all, because
that's what the studies say at the end of the day.
Well, then they're mistaken, and here's why. To say that in all these instances where someone is wet, we saw that it was raining. And then to say that if we remove the rain, people won't be wet. That is essentially the path we're going down with this sort of argument. Because I'm looking at this as there are good ideas that we can put into people's heads, and religion can, in fact, put those good ideas into people's heads. But when I look at, is religion a positive influence on society, it's not just can and does religion, and I guess we'd have to pick out which ones we're talking about, put a good idea into somebody's heads. Is that the best way to put an idea into somebody's head? And are religions also putting a lot of bad ideas into people's head alongside those good ideas? Because if we're going to say, is it a positive influence on society? And it turns out that, yes, it has positive influences on society, but that on the whole, it's a negative, that, it's divisive, or the baggage that comes along with these good ideas, that to me is where I'm going to have to kind of draw my line on, is it a positive influence on society? Because if all we mean is, does religion, and this is the weird thing about religion and religiosity, because we're always talking about people. We're talking about people taking actions and then attributing it to their religion. In many cases, it is, I took this action because I am sincerely convinced that this is the best course of action. And you could be convinced of that through a religion, whether it's true or not, through many different religions, and they can't all be true. Or perhaps there are methods by which we can encourage those same ideas without a religion. And so if I'm like I said in the opening, if I'm looking at religion and whether or not it's a positive influence, I think one of the tests would be to remove it. And you're implying or saying that the studies say, it looks like when we remove this, the good benefits go away, except that hasn't been the case. When we haven't removed religion, and we don't have the sort of samples we would need to look at and say, here are a group of people who were never influenced by religion, or here are people who had religious foundations replaced by secular humanist foundations. The only thing that they can really look at is, here's people who self-identify intrinsically through questions and extrinsically as religious, and here's people who don't, and look at their behavior. But it's not somebody in the talk that I did with Jordan Peterson the other day. I suggested that, there's never actually been a secular humanist society for us to use as a sample set for this sort of stuff. And he mistakenly said that, yes, there was Soviet Russia, which I beat him up over, because there's no way you could say it was an atheist state, but you can't say it was a secular humanist state because those values aren't there. So it seems like we're kind of conflating. We have a society that's primarily religious, and religions certainly do instill good ideas into people. And I would think everybody would agree that religions also instill some bad ideas in people. Now, if all we care about is it instilling something good? I mean, I hate to go, I'm sure Jeffrey Dahmer loved his mom and did something nice at some point, but, I don't know that would qualify him as a good person.
So if you're arguing possibility, not probability, going back to your rain analogy, if we saw a bunch of people wet, sure, we don't know, it doesn't prove it's raining, but it does show it is far more probable. Again, I'm arguing that this is far more probable based on the data I presented. I mean, on a whole, it seems to show that it does show the positive benefits. And, people have studied religious versus irreligious. For example, Dr. Tony Jack, he has looked at non-religious people versus religious, and he has found that with non-religious people, that it's far more likely that sociopathic tendencies tend to arise. Empathetic intelligence does drop in those sorts of things. So we do actually see that with regards to that. And then we do actually, so people have looked at it, not as much as we've not gotten to the point where we've gotten a lot of meta-analysis, like we have focused on specifically intrinsic versus extrinsic religion. But we have seen some studies going in that direction. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Again, I'm just going to be arguing from the data itself. If you're going to be arguing, well, we haven't had a full secular society, we can't really measure it. Well, we have to go on the data that we have in front of us. Well, I understand. Data shows that intrinsic religion does increase ethical behavior on large scales. At the end of the day, it does show that the net gain does show religion is far more beneficial than anything else. I mean, I could compare it to pet ownership. You could take pet owners. Pet ownership does increase overall well-being, happiness, joy in life, although sometimes pets do bite people and in fact have killed some children. Just because there is some bad things with pet ownership doesn't mean all pet ownership is bad, or that doesn't show that the net worth, the net gain is worse.
Sure. So I think I understand we have to work with the data we're working with, but what I'm talking about is the way the data is being portrayed. When you see, for example, the study you were talking about where we take a look at non-religious people and sociopathy is increased in that population. That doesn't tell you whether a lack of religiosity somehow increases sociopathy or whether sociopaths are less likely to be religious. The fact that and I would argue that we're probably, in many cases, when we're talking about sociopathic tendencies, we are probably not talking about as often how much somebody was raised or how somebody was raised, that there are probably genetic factors that contribute to mental defects in sociopathy. So if it's the case that the overwhelming majority of sociopaths are non-religious, that is not an effect of being non-religious. That is, it's not like people gave up religion and became sociopaths. We don't have evidence that that sort of thing happens. And when we talk about the net gain, when we look at these